Right, admit.
Mhm.
Good morning. Good morning, Joel. Good morning, Jason. Good morning, Ruth. Nice to see you all here this morning. So I've done a bit of a draft agenda. We're just waiting for a couple more people, but I think it's okay if I talk briefly before I hand over to everyone to introduce themselves. So the purpose of this morning's meeting really is because there's been a lot of talk on Twitter and various social media platforms from family members directly affected by imprisonment, and some of the work that's been going on and the business activities of Shrewsbury Prison have been a bit triggering and upsetting for certain demographics of people, especially those who are family members of people in prison currently. So I thought that's why I wanted to bring this to Joel's attention and invite other people who are probably more connected than myself to share their insights, and at the end of the talk, hopefully make a few recommendations that Joel and the Campbell Group might consider taking on board into the future. I'm going to start on quite a high note, which might be a bit shocking, but Joel, you've probably seen on Twitter, some people have compared Shrewsbury Prison to leasing Grenfell Tower and hosting Escape from the Fire days. Now, that is a dramatic and really distasteful idea, but where it comes from is that just 8 years ago, this prison had record number of suicides and horrendous self-harm. And in fact, in just a 24-hour period in 2012, in just 24 hours, 2 young men committed suicide within that same 24 hours in the cells where people are now playing games and having tours and things like that, and that's where the ideas come from. That, is it that prisoners' lives, even though these 2 boys were on remand, is it that prisoners' lives are somehow less valuable? They somehow deserve, not to be respected even in death. And I think that's what inspired me, to talk to you in the first place. And that's great that you've come on this call to discuss it. So. Lorna's in the waiting room, so I'll just admit Lorna now, and as well. Welcome, Lorna, and very good morning to you. So what I'd like to do now, after that brief introduction, is to ask everybody to introduce themselves individually. If you could spend a couple of minutes talking about what you do, the stakeholders you represent, and why you were particularly interested to come on this call, if that's okay. Shall we start with you, Cara, please?
It's actually pronounced Cara, so I'm the policy and campaigns coordinator for Children Heard and Seen, small charity based in Oxfordshire that supports children impacted by parental imprisonment and their families, but I've worked in criminal justice for over 30 years in custodial and community settings, and I think it's just the kind of the feelings that have been expressed by families, particularly, that has sort of influenced my attendance today. But I mean, I've got sort of personal feelings about it too, if I'm being perfectly honest. But that's kind of why I'm here.
Thank you very much, Cara. Ruth, would you like to tell us about why you're here and your experiences of supporting people in prison?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I'm a bit of a sort of a last minute entry to this, and I always feel like a bit of a fraud because I haven't spent time in prison myself, but I've spent a long time working, teaching in prisons mainly. I have a new social enterprise which is aimed at supporting higher education delivery in prison, and particularly looking at the support that we give to people when they're released to be able to carry on their studies. And I'm really interested in labels and stigma and the challenges that people have when they leave prison in trying to reintegrate in society and just stop having to carry that burden of the conviction around with them all the time. And I was just so impressed that Joel had agreed to meet, and I think that that says a lot about you and your organisation, and I really think that this kind of discussion about how prison is presented is an important one, and if I can contribute in some way, then I'm pleased to.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Jason, so thank you.
Hi, just to echo that, Ruth, Joe, I think it's brilliant you've come on the call and prepared to listen to people who spend time in the prison and with prisoners. So my name's Jason Fleming. I'm currently in Sofia, but the amazement of the internet still baffles me, and it's amazing. But I train listeners in London prisons, and I was actually in this weekend in Brixton, and all I'd like to contribute, I'm here really to support Philip, but any questions that you've got for me, Joel, I will answer. But I've just got to echo what has just been said. It's just about the level of respect that's given to prisoners and to people incarcerated in the past, and how they're then treated after that. Just one fact just now, just to sort of talk about, to express what I'm saying, is that only 11% of the prison population have received inoculation against coronavirus, and yet it's endemically, geographically, just the situation of people living that close to each other in double cells. It's been horrific, and they've been on a 23.5-hour bang up, mostly in Brixton and Wandsworth, since last March. And I know they're at the bottom of the list of people sympathise for and care about, but I do deeply, and I know that the other people in this call do too. So thanks, Joel, and it's great that we're having this discussion, and I'm sure we can come to some kind of improvement of the situation.
Thank you, Jason. Lorna, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. At this point, I normally catastrophically talk for a minute and a half on mute. So can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I'm Lorna Hackett. I'm a human rights lawyer. I am head of legal practice at Hackett & Dabbs, which is a sort of bespoke law firm which has just barristers in it, no solicitors. I've been representing prisoners for about 15 years, and in terms of judicial reviews, parole board hearings, categorization, escape risk, all sorts of things really, healthcare issues, privacy, Rule 39, and I've represented hundreds of prisoners. I couldn't count, but I did my first parole hearing in 2007, so it's been quite a while. And I mean, I know a lot of prisoners. I mentor prisoners who come out of prison now, not because I get paid for it, but because I really believe in it. And I'm a very long-standing supporter of people who are convicted and living with sentences of imprisonment for public protection. So I'm a firm believer in that behind every criminal conviction, there is a person, there's a story, and very often there's trauma. And so I work with people really throughout their sentences to try and get the best available result for them in the end, and that's a just result. So in the course of the other sort of stuff that I do, I sit as a panel member for Inside Justice, which is a charity which investigates alleged miscarriages of justice. And I've also done a lot of work with Learning Together, who are sadly very significantly in the spotlight at the moment with the Fishmongers Hall inquest. So Joel, amazing that you are having this discussion with us. Really appreciate it. For what it's worth, before anyone else says anything, my view is that there is a place for the public to be better informed about imprisonment and the realities of it. And it's not, a Butlins holiday camp with everybody sitting around, doing drugs and sitting on their Xboxes. That's not imprisonment. It's not right. And actually, but a compassionate starting point is a must for me. So just to say, I think actually there is a very significant place for educating the public about prison.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you. Faith, could you tell us a bit about yourself, please, and why you joined us today?
Yes, sorry I was a bit late. I was looking after my son's spaniel.
No problem.
I'm a writer, criminologist. Some call me a whistleblower and a commentator on prisons. I've had close family members and friends in prison, and my father-in-law was a prison officer. So I've visited every category of prison, including the women's estate and YOI. I started by monitoring a Cat D prison. I did that for 4 years. I've also delivered training to governors and custodial managers in the last few years. and I continually push for transparency and accountability within the prison estate. And I'm the author of the Criminal Justice blog. I thought it was quite an important conversation to have, because it's how people perceive prisons, how we portray those that have been within the prison estate. So I think all these kind of conversations we need to have. But it's important that it's not them and us. And when we talk about reintroducing people back into society, you know, surely prisons are part of society. So there needs to be a good conversation around this. I personally haven't visited that prison, so it's very difficult to comment when I haven't actually visited it. But I have some idea because of the amount of prisons that I have actually been in over the last 10 years or so. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you everyone for attending and for introducing yourselves. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Joel, for 10 or 15 minutes to tell us a bit about the background, why he took on the prison, and perhaps a little bit about his future plans, for the tourism aspects of the prison and other things. So I'll hand over to Joel and look forward to listening to him.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Joel. I am the CEO of the Campbell Group, which effectively is a parent company for a number of different businesses and business interests that we have in different industries and different sectors. Obviously, today we're talking very much about the prison side of things, which is our tourism destination sector, if you will, our heritage-led tourism destination side. We actually have two businesses operating there. You're obviously looking more at Shrewsbury Prison today, but we also operate Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset, which is the country's oldest working prison until its closure in 2013. It's only predated by one other prison built in 1625. So it was basically built a few years after Shakespeare died. So it's the oldest prison pretty much we have in the country. Huge amounts of history and heritage in there. But predominantly, obviously, you wanted to discuss more about Shrewsbury today. I think in terms of the call, as I've said to Phil all the way along, I made it very clear on Twitter, I live my life and my businesses as a complete open book. Anything you want to see about what we do, how we operate, any of our businesses, it is all there on social media to be looked at. Nothing is hidden away. Nothing's ever swept under the carpet. And it was actually me that pushed forward to do this, because I felt that there was, I wouldn't say it was a huge number, but certainly I think the number is kind of irrelevant to me. It was more about the way people were feeling, that it was important to address that and to listen to people's concerns and to listen to their thoughts. And I do this pretty much every single week in various different meetings with various different bodies, various different charities, various different organizations across the board. So this isn't a new thing for me at all. It's just a case of, I think everyone has a slightly different position to that, how I may normally, from people I may normally speak with. I spend a lot of time with people in youth work, but not necessarily people that are working with children that are already in the prison system, although we do that, and we do that with police and stuff like that. I spend a fair bit of time with solicitors, not so much with barristers, I have to say, which is probably a good thing from my perspective. And we do, like I say, spend a lot of time with different charities. And I spend a huge amount of time speaking with ex-offenders, families, normally partners or parents as opposed to children, but I do get to meet them. I spend a huge amount of time with officers, governors and stuff like that. But you will all almost certainly have more experience in the prison systems than I do. Almost certainly. I'd be surprised if you didn't. I guess in terms of the background of it, in terms of how it came to be, I back in 2000, I think it was 2010, maybe 2009, 2010. My wife actually works as a clinical psychologist delivering behavioural change programs in Shepton Mallet Prison, so with lifers. And predominantly sex offenders. So she was delivering the old SOTP programs, which I'm sure we will pick up on later. And the challenges those had, she was dealing victim empathy, she was doing ETS and such like that. So that's kind of how my journey into prison sort of started. And I was fortunate enough that at that prison, it was a Cat C prison. It was run very much as an open locked jail. I was given the opportunity to be able to go on a tour around it, which was currently led by officers. They were taking basically people like yourselves, effectively, around these prisons to show them what prisons were actually like as they were running. So I got onto one of those tours, 2009, 2010, and I was fascinated by it, absolutely fascinated by somebody that had never been in prison, heard my wife talk about things she was allowed to talk about. Obviously, there's certain things she wasn't allowed to talk about. And I remember when she first started working in there, my preconception of prison was completely different from what it was actually like. And Hollywood had distorted that massively for me. And I was really surprised. And I remember when I went around the prison for the first time and watched prisoners actually backing away from me and kind of standing against the wall because they didn't want to get too close, and just seeing the various behavior and listening to prisoners and listening to prison officers, it was a fascinating experience. And I looked at that, I went, there is something there that people do not understand what goes on behind the walls en masse. And there was absolutely a click for me, a light bulb moment that sort of looked at kind of what was happening at Alcatraz and went, that would make a really good heritage site. That's what Shepton Mallet would do, is it would fit really nicely in there. And I kind of just put that to bed, didn't really think about it at all. I actually had a chat with the deputy governor about it a couple of years later, just at one of the staff parties they had, one of the staff outings, and sort of spoke to her about it and said, look, I thought this would be a great idea in the future. And in 2013, the MOJ closed 7 prisons, of which Shepton was one, Shrewsbury was another. So I decided that I wanted to put a bid in to buy Shepton Mallet Prison and develop it into a heritage site, a world-class heritage site. That was the aspiration for Shepton Mallet Prison. So I put a bid into the MOJ. I competed with lots of developers, pretty much. I think it was just me that wasn't a property developer, all of which wanted to build houses or apartments or whatever it may have been, and do different things with it. And unfortunately, I got to the last 3 in the bidding process, but it was sold to a developer for a tiny sum, far under what it should be valued at, and certainly what it's valued at today. So that kind of put that one to bed. But off the back of that, because I didn't want to let it lie, I started writing cold emails to other developers, to basically say, look, I think you might have bought Shepton Mallet Prison. I wanted to bid, or I did bid for it. I wanted it to turn into a heritage site. And ideally, if you did buy it, I'd be really interested in talking to you. And through that conversation, I spoke to a person who just bought Shrewsbury Prison. And they said they bought Shrewsbury Prison. They were going to be putting planning consent on it for student accommodation and a gym and some housing. And it was going to take them a year. Did I want it in the meantime? So I very much opened Shrewsbury Prison a few months later as a pop-up tourist attraction. That's what it was. It was supposed to be open for a year. We were going to run just tours around the jail, led by ex-officers, showcasing what actually happened in prisons. And when the prisons closed, I think all of the 7 jails that shut, the MOJ allowed prison officers to run tours for a couple of months, basically through the disposal process, as the MOJ would call it. So we kind of just picked up off the back of that, really. And that's literally what we did. And we did that for the first year. All we did was just run tours. So we ran 4 tours a day, 7 days a week, led by prison officers. And we saw thousands of people come through in the first year. And it was off the back of that the developers were taking a lot longer than they'd hoped to get planning applications through and planning permission through. So we started expanding our offering, and the Shrewsbury Prison Company started to grow, and we started to do self-guided tours, and we started to do a ghost tour, and we started to do a few other things and expand into other areas and such like that. We put a tiny little restaurant on site, a really, really small restaurant, just to teas and coffees and cakes. And then literally year on year, month after month, the developers slowed down on what they were doing. And as they slowed, we expanded. 2017, I took over Shepton Mallet Prison and Gloucester Prison. And we opened both of those. Literally 4 years ago today, we opened Shepton Mallet. So it's Shepton Mallet's opening birthday, if you will, in that sense. So we did all of that. And then about a year and a half later, we closed Gloucester. We just didn't find it was working. The condition of the site was really poor. It was in quite a bad state of repair. And to be honest, it wasn't really a financially viable model. So part of that drove us to close Gloucester and concentrate very much on Shepton and Shrewsbury, which is what we did. They've both then developed in their own journeys. They are slightly different in terms of how they operate and what they do. One's very much Shrewsbury's very much a tourist or a heritage-led tourist attraction, whereas Shepton's very much a heritage-led tourism site. And there is a difference, a subtle difference in the wording, but quite a big difference in the delivery between the two. And then last year during lockdown, I just kind of felt enough was enough, and I was finding it quite difficult back and forth with developers, 6-month agreements here, 3 months agreements there. So I went forward and I took the risk and I put forward the purchase of Shrewsbury Prison in the middle of a lockdown. So I did that, which we're just going through at the moment. And then we secured a longer agreement at Shepton, which I think will probably roll into us end up buying that again in sort of about 18 months to 2 years. And that kind of brings us up to where we are now. I think where this all kind of escalated from was from one post that went up on social media about our prison break event, which we currently run at Shrewsbury. And people got hold of that, and actually it was a hugely popular post on Facebook and Instagram. I mean, I'm talking into millions of people that connected in with us that wanted to do this event. And then there was a very small number on Twitter that didn't like it, which is very much how I sort of got connected through Phil, and where this kind of spanned from. So that's kind of, I guess, gives you a nutshell up to here, and it's probably easier for you then to ask me questions around things and have a discussion from there, really, rather than me rabbiting on.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joel. That's a helpful overview of what's happened. So we're going to have a general chat and questions, as you said, but can I just pick up on one thing you said, which is you're talking a lot about it being a heritage site and the history of the site and things like that. But on your social media, the hashtag that keeps appearing is dark tourism, rather less about the heritage side of the building, and the reviews as well seem less about the heritage of this being a listed building, and more about the fact that, oh, we can do ghost hunting here. And I think, you know, the first question that I'd like to put to you is, how would you address the comparison between Grenfell Tower, where 72 people sadly lost their lives, and Shrewsbury Prison, where more people even lost their lives, including some sad suicides in just 9 years ago? Because there must be a comparison, and the only difference seems to be the demographic of people involved. So I think now's a good time for questions and answers, but yeah, it's a good time for questions and answers. But if you could just perhaps touch on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm only talking from my personal opinion. That's all I can give in this. But I think what you're doing is you're comparing two things that are incomparable. Yes, people lost lives in both, and for different reasons, and neither of those are less important than the other. To say that people that committed suicide or died in prison are less important than people that died in Grenfell would be wrong, absolutely. But the circumstances surrounding that are completely different. So I don't think you can compare the two together in that way. And the same as when we talk about Auschwitz in the same breath, because again, millions of people died there.
Yes,
but it's a different circumstance. In terms of where you asked it originally, we use a number of different marketing models, and you've got to be careful about balancing what we do in terms of a commercial marketing process, if you will. I think that's probably the easiest way to explain it. And in terms of what you would see maybe as a traditional heritage site, English Heritage, for example, can do things in a certain way because they're fully funded by the taxpayer. They don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their staff at the end of the month and how they're going to maintain buildings, because they've got an everlasting, ever-growing pot of money. So they're fine. So you're thinking traditional heritage. If you look at things like our social media, we talk about dark tourism because that's very much what we are, and we embrace that, and that's what we are, and both sites are. And I would go as far as to argue that most castles in the country, places like Warwick Castle, Shrewsbury Castle, Whittington Castle, there's hundreds of them, if not thousands, would also fall into that dark tourism sector. It just depends on how the history, how the stories are told, and how that's put forward. But we use heritage and heritage site and heritage across our hashtags all over the place because it's a big one for us. But dark tourism is a very strong hashtag, which we come up very high in the searches. So people tapping dark tourism into Google will naturally find us. Now that's more of a commercial process in terms of getting people to find us, because we have to funnel people into our world, otherwise they won't know about us. Just as that's what this meeting will do. When I push this meeting out live into our followers, new people will find us.
I think Jason would like to say something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get that. I mean, I think Auschwitz is a bad comparison because that's about, you know, not forgetting something that happened in the past. But I mean, the Tower of London, for God's sake, I mean, you couldn't get darker than that. And that's a viable business that is there to make money, as yours is. And, you know, there's nothing to be ashamed about taking a building like that and turning it around 4 tours a day and making, you know, a living out of it. And I applaud you for that. What I think might be useful, Joel, and I'm not in any way patronizing, I think what you've done, you know, you've got an amazing business and you've done it well. But it's maybe a little bit more, because I mean, that is the hashtag dark tourism, and that's what would interest me. You know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, that sounds wicked. That sounds great. I'm going to go and look at that. But as a person who trains listeners in prisons throughout London, I think maybe what it is, it's almost what we're talking about is the people that are involved in the prison service or ex-offenders seeing it and going, oh, that's really gross. That's really horrible, because that's where I was locked up for 23 hours. Why are they doing that? Why is there a restaurant and a sandwich bar there? So I get that there's a small amount of people who are offended by this. And I think it's more to do with like the logistics of how you appease those people. And I do mean appease, not please, or it's just like an understanding of those people. And I know that compared to the millions who want to do it, there's a very tiny amount who are offended by it. It's almost like that kind of awareness of what actually this place is. And that's what needs to be addressed more than the fact that your business model needs to be addressed, in my humble opinion.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think what you'll uncover from a lot of this is actually there's been a purposeful not digging into what we do and taking one aspect of our business, which is all driven around our prison break event effectively, and not looked at everything else we do. And that's one piece of about 16 different things we do. And 4 of those things, I would say, are probably not heritage based. They're in a heritage building, they're not heritage based. Whereas the other 12, that's what they do. So 75% of our business is driven into that heritage world. But no, I think you're absolutely right. And the listener program is really interesting for me. It's one that we talk about a huge amount on the tours. So it is one that the officers are extremely positive about in the manner, the way they deliver it. And they talk a lot about, if it wasn't for those listeners, then actually things like the suicide rate and the self-harming rate would be a huge amount higher, would be a lot higher. And that's what they tell public in their droves.
Thank you. Faith?
Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, wrote, "As a nation, it is essential that we preserve our heritage and celebrate and learn from our past." I know that in July, you awarded a grant as a heritage organisation. The Chief Executive of English Heritage wrote, "This funding will help invest to safeguard the historic fabric of these much loved places which everyone can learn from and enjoy." As you talk about it as a heritage site, I think what concerns me really is the element of enjoyment. I mean, yes, we all visit historic houses, castles, monuments or whatever. Then classing a prison alongside that, I think we need to make sure that we separate fiction from fact.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think what you've taken there is a paragraph from the funding body, which was the government.
Yeah.
The government did the
Yeah.
funding. They pushed out obviously to support businesses through COVID. We obviously applied for funding, as did lots of other heritage and tourism and leisure businesses and such in our sector. And we were fortunate enough to be awarded funding for both of our sites, which was great. We never turned around and said it's fun. That's not what we've done as part of the funding. So I think you're taking the wording there for that, but you're absolutely right. And it's one when we talk about people coming to see what we do, we talk about things like destination of discovery. We talk about things like shining a light on reality, life behind bars, see what goes on behind the wall. We don't highlight it by saying, come and have a great family fun day out. I'm not saying we've never done that, because, we're a business and we're people, and we've made mistakes, and we do make mistakes. But we talk about, interaction. We talk about things like the interpretation spaces and seeing it for yourself. It's about accessing a place that people only ever get to see in their minds. Unless you're actually sentenced and you go to prison, you never get to see it in the reality. Visitors only get to see a small section of prison. They get to see the process at the beginning, the searching. They get to see the visit process, and that's it. They don't get to see anything beyond that, and there's a huge piece behind it. And you know, we'll never be able to replicate the reality of prison. It was one of the things that came up very early on when we started doing this, and I spent a lot of time with ex-offenders and different people, and there was this piece around where you can never replicate, and that's why we don't do a prison experience, because that was one of the things somebody asked us to do, was this, do a real prison experience. We're like, but we can't, because we can't replicate the feelings that people have when they come through the doors. We can't replicate 300 different prisoners and 300 different things happening all at the same time, and we can't replicate the fear that people will feel the first time they're incarcerated, the first night they're spending in the cells, the first nights they're removed from their families, the first nights they're removed from society. We can't replicate that. And to be honest, I'm not actually sure I'd want to, because it's not what we do. So in that sense, we do take that, and we do approach it with an urgent caution about how we push forward what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, we look at ourselves as custodians of history, and we have a responsibility to make sure we deliver that in an appropriate, proper manner. We don't get it wrong.
Can I just jump in? I think I'm hearing everything, Joel, and I get time to comment, but I think there are some contradictions in some of the things that you're saying. It's to them. But well,
this is where.
But let me
pick up on
one second. And there's a thing around this sort of cell escape room event that you have, where somebody has been, you know, convicted of armed robbery. They've turned information so that, you know, they got a lesser sentence, but the sort of gangmaster is going to come and sort of has paid officers to be in the same cell as them, so the person's got to escape. And you know, we've got families who their loved ones have been assaulted by the person that they're turned up within a cell. We know that there are people that have been murdered by the person that they're turned up within a cell. So I think, you know, obviously you're running a business, and fair play to you for doing what you're doing. But I think there is something around that we have to just be careful about making entertainment out of something that people are currently experiencing. And you know, particularly sort of at the moment through the pandemic, you know, like families haven't seen their loved ones for up to a year, over a year sometimes. That, you know, one of the things that did make me chuckle was, you know, this truly authentic experience. But then the next kind of thing is woken in the morning to the smell of fresh coffee and a hearty breakfast. You know, there aren't many prisoners getting that first thing in the morning. But yeah, I think for me it's about the sort of, there's a marketing issue around it and kind of how it's presented. And I think there's, you know, I don't want to insult you, but there's almost a lack of sensitivity around the fact that people are experiencing this thing right now and being traumatized by it, have experienced trauma that led them to it in the first place. That's been compounded by their experience in prison. And the whole kind of ghost hunting paranormal thing, you know, that sits uncomfortably with me, because you're talking about people that have either been put to death or have taken their own lives in that building. And there is just something almost quite distasteful to me about it. I don't mean to insult you, but there just is.
I've got incredibly thick skin. I promise you will not be able to insult me.
That's a challenge, Joel. That's a challenge.
Hey, I've been by professionals. I'll be fine. So let me just pick up on a few things now. I think there's you're comparing apples and pears, because you're comparing lots of different elements of our business together, and you're trying to see it there as one approach to fit your perspective. That, and I get where you're coming from. I think personally, it is a prison. Let's be honest. It's a prison. It's changed. We can turn the heating back on, put the locks back on. It could be open as a prison within 7 days. The MOJ style. I think when you talk about I'm just trying to go through some of the things that you talked about there. Absolutely, in terms of the marketing with things like you picked up on the night behind bars, and you do get this real experience of being in a real cell. You don't have other prisoners in there with you, so that's where it moves slightly. And yes, we do give them breakfast in the morning. I think that different prisons have different levels of catering and different standards of catering. Shrewsbury was actually fantastic for food. So as a prison, Shrewsbury was renowned for how good its food is. If you speak to any of the ex-offenders that spent at Shrewsbury, it's one of the first things they'll tell you, how good the food was at Shrewsbury. So that's unique to Shrewsbury, but that's kind of, as you say, it's a marketing piece in the sense of we do have tickets to sell, and therefore we deliver marketing in a way that will allow us to do that. In terms of things like the strip cell, well, that's not used in the escape rooms or prison break or night behind bars. That's part of the heritage side. That's looking at what 4 different segregation cells that we have here were used for and how they've been used over time and how they've changed. So that's got nothing to do with the event side of our business. And they're very different. The event side is very different from our tour side, if you will.
But
so they're
Joel,
seeing
in your
different parts of the
marketing,
building.
it says that on the sort of prison break thing or the overnight stay, that people get a tour of those areas.
We take them on a heritage tour. Yeah, we'll take them on a heritage tour so they can see it and they can experience it. Absolutely, it's part of the package. We will take them on a heritage tour, and it's led. And when we talk about real officers, it is led by real prison officers, people that have worked in prison service for 38, 40 years. So we're not doing this. It's not me going, oh, I'm going to run a prison tour and pretend I know what I'm talking about. We have based it in the knowledge that exists. We use prison officers. I think the shortest term of a serving prison officer we have with us is 32 years. So we're talking about people that have been in there for years. And then we've consulted with ex-prisoners and we've adapted tours to fit with some of their positions, some of their thoughts, some of their feelings. We have ex-prisoners do it. We've had ex-prisoners come and run tours. We've had the person that escaped from here in the 60s run tours. I've had the family of the last person, because you're talking about when people were executed. The execution is a really, really sensitive subject. And when you say that there aren't people, that's a bit different because it was so long ago. We've had the family of the person that was last executed here in the 60s come and do a tour. And I've stood with them in the execution room and talked to them about their experience of their great uncle who was hanged in that very room. And I've had the ex-prison officers, an ex-prison officer who was in the room as part of the execution team, who was holding the rope and holding the prisoner next to him. So I've spent time with these people and listened to their thoughts and listened to their feelings and listened to their approach. So we can get the reality right, so we can talk about it in an appropriate manner, in a correct manner, but also to find out what's deemed as appropriate and not appropriate. And I would say that the family of the person who was executed and the prison officers that were there at the time have a much better position of a much clearer position than anyone else, because they're the ones directly connected to it. But absolutely, there's going to be people that get offended by what we do. It's the same in everything in life.
So sorry, Joel. I know Lorna has a question, but can I just pick up on that point very briefly, if I may? You mentioned on Twitter that a family member of someone who'd committed suicide recently actually came and left some flowers and a book, I believe, in the cell. Is that right?
Flowers and a card, yeah.
Flowers and a card, thank you.
It was the mother, yeah.
Which you then subsequently removed because tours and people were going to be playing the various games in that cell. Now, my question is...
No, it was taken out because of self-guidance.
Self-guidance?
It was taken out because it was done at a period of time, self-guidance. It was done at a period of time. This is long before, this is back in our first year of operating. And this is what I'm talking about, Phil. You have a very good way of taking bits to fit your agenda, which is what I say to you on Twitter. And I will correct you on those when you do it. But what happened there was a lady came on one of our tours. It was unbeknownst to us. She came on one of our tours. And during that tour, she basically snuck off the back of it and she disappeared into a cell. And it was when she came back out that we noticed, when we looked at it, she'd left a card and a flower in a cell, which is where her son had committed suicide when he was in prison years before. And when we spoke to her about it, that's what she wanted to do. And it stayed there in that very cell for about 8 months. It was in there for a long, long time. When we started doing self-guided tours where people could basically come in and wander themselves around with a visitor guide, we knew it wouldn't be safe there. We knew it would disappear. So we took it out to preserve that. And then we had a long debate, and it's been kept very safe, but we had a long debate. Should this be something that gets put in the museum? Should it not? And we decided in the end it isn't appropriate to put it in the museum without her saying, that's fine, I'm happy for you to do that. So we've still got it here. It's still under lock and key, and it's still very safe. But that's why it was removed. It's got nothing to do with the event side of our business.
Okay, because on Twitter, I thought you said because you were going to use the cell, but my point is if there's more than 200 cells there, I think, you can just lock that cell and put this cell is permanently closed in memory of someone who sadly took their lives. Please take a moment and pause for reflection. Wouldn't that be more appropriate than putting the lady's card and flower somewhere else?
I mean, I guess that's a position of opinion. I would say no, because ultimately, as we know, we're running a business. So we utilize those spaces for different things. People walk into them. And ultimately, if we do that, we could end up closing 178 cells potentially, because they've all got a story. Every single cell has got a story. And it just so happens that that one cell as well happened to be the same cell that Ricky Tomlinson was incarcerated in when he was here. So to close it suddenly closes another piece of history. It becomes very difficult for us to talk about. What we never do, and we did this at Gloucester, because Gloucester, and sorry, I'll be quiet off this, Jason, let you come in. But what we did at Gloucester, because when we took over Gloucester housed Fred West, and it housed Fred West for years and years and years. He'd been in and out of prison for years before he was finally caught for obviously for the murders and such, before he was incarcerated for that, or before he was on remand for that. And one of the things that always used to happen at Gloucester was one of the things people always used to say is, which cell was Fred West in? And we would never tell people. The reality is he was actually in many different cells. He moved around. But when he was there on remand before he went to Birmingham, he was in one very specific cell. We knew exactly which cell it was because the officers that worked there at the time were tour guides. So they told us. And we made it very clear to all of our staff, nobody was ever to talk about the Fred West cell. Nobody was ever to go through it. It was never talked about. It was never discussed. And the only time we ever spoke about Fred West when we operated that prison was when the BBC brought it up in an interview to us, accusing us of monetizing Fred West's murders. And we said, no, that's exactly the opposite of what we do. So in that sense, we're very careful about how we talk about what's happened to specific people in cells. We'll talk about instances, absolutely. We'll talk about suicides. We'll talk about self-harming. We'll talk about attacks. We talk about the reason for the first night officer and how that came about because of the young lad that was killed in his cell. So we'll talk about those stories, but we won't specifically say Steve Bright was in that cell and he committed suicide in this year. We wouldn't do that. That's not how we operate. Sorry, Jason.
So it's
sorry, Phil. I mean, Joel, I'd argue that that maybe that is what Philip's suggesting could be interesting as an appeasement to the people who've taken their lives in prison and to the people whose families are still aware that you're, that you have an attraction, that you're using a prison for, and that door locked and that message put on it to represent all dead prisoners and all people who've committed suicide or self-harmed in prisons and a moment's reflection. Not only would that, for me, make me feel like you, Joel, were taking the past and what happens to prisoners now and in the past seriously, but also I think it would add to your experience that people would then be
absolutely. Yeah.
The moment when you go, oh shit, this is real, these people have really died here, that with respect to the people that have died, including what Philip was just saying about closing that door, I think one would add to your experience, and two would appease a lot of people and make people feel a lot more secure in the fact that you guys are respecting ex-offenders and people who have a second chance and have turned their lives around since they left prison. Maybe.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree with you. I think that's not a bad idea, and it's one of the things that we've again spoken about in the past. Do we do some kind of dedicated space? And the challenge is that there is a percentage of people that absolutely, like you say, will look at that as a real positive, and I would be part of that camp. But then there's a huge number of people that won't, and that's the difficult balance that we have in terms of what we do, because we're running a balance between a commercial organization and a heritage approach where we very, like I say, we're custodians of the history of it. So we have to storytell it in a very careful way. And we need to be sensitive about how we do that piece, because we can't just, and how we lead into it as well, because we bring a lot of,
won't what? a huge amount of people who won't, he said.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that won't. It depends on how we build that piece. And I think that's what's going to take a lot of care, and it's going to take a lot of thought process about how we would build that, almost that interpretation space, if you will, or that part of the attraction, depending on how it comes together. But there's an awful lot of people that won't, if it's not done in the right way, they won't understand it. And one of the common things that we hear, and it's something that we're always really careful about and cautious, it's one of the things we like doing the guided tours for, is because lots of times we'll get the opinion of, well, they committed the crime. And that's a hugely common response that we get, which is, well, you know, they didn't have to take their own life. They didn't have to commit the crime. They didn't have to get into prison. And it takes us a long time to educate people on that process.
They weren't even guilty. They were innocent.
Phil,
they were on remand.
It takes us a long time. It takes us a long time to get people to understand that there's a huge piece that happens before people even go to prison, and it's not just a case of they committed the crime. It's not just that case, and that's what we need to be careful of when we put something like that. That people don't look at it at face value. They've got to look at it in more depth than that. Phil, what you're talking about, just
can I let Lorna speak? Sorry, Lorna's been waiting. She has some points for a minute.
You can, but just
I have to go in a minute.
Just let me. Sorry, Lorna. Just what you're picking up there, Phil, about those two prisoners that committed suicide. I think you're picking that up from an Independent article, aren't you? The article from the Independent, which is heavily factually incorrect. And I don't actually think that was a Shrewsbury Prison. I don't think it was 2012. And I spoke to the governor this morning about that, and he can't recall it either. So we've spoken about that, and there was no prisoner here in 2012 on remand, because we were a full custodial prison at Shrewsbury from in 2012. So there was no remand prisoners here anyway. So you're misquoting
the article in 2012, but perhaps we can.
Well, that's something you can pick up with him, and he's very active on Twitter. So please do. But you're picking up points again that are miswritten in articles. You're then miscommunicating them to fit your own agenda.
I think I'm going to try and believe the mainstream media rather than.
That's absolutely fine. You can believe the mainstream media, but I'm speaking with people that were here at the time. So I'm hearing it firsthand. Okay. You're picking up from a reporter.
I am going to favour the mainstream media over here. Say thank you. I'll hand you over to Lorna.
That's fine.
I just like to say I don't favour hearsay or media. I don't believe either of them. But just to say, I think at the risk of being sort of slightly unpopular here, I think there's a real opportunity. A lot of the people on this, in fact, everybody on this Zoom, has spent a lot of time in prison, whether visiting, supporting, surrounded by prisoners' families, working in prisons. And in some respects, you know, I'm a middle-class, middle-aged woman. Most people that I spend my time with don't spend a lot of time in prison. And I think there's a real opportunity here for the people who want to learn about what prison is like and the stories behind the individuals. And the fact that there are, for example, strip cells, that it's not all a holiday camp. It's not fun. It's difficult. It's traumatic. There are people who are innocent that go to prison. There are people who are convicted of the wrong thing. And there are people who can't cope with mental illness in prison. There is genuinely, I think, a real opportunity to educate the public about what goes on in prison, because this isn't just about Shrewsbury Prison. This isn't just about Shepton Mallet. There are lots of prisons, and there are lots of prisoners having these experiences all the time. So if people are willingly paying money, yes, you know, you can't expect people to go into a tourist attraction heritage site, spend money in order to have an experience which they hate, which they come away from despising, thinking, God, that was shit. I'm going home now to be even more depressed. That's mad. So people are going to need, people don't want to spend their money on something that they come away with having learned something from, having enjoyed, having an augmented sense of reality or perspective. So why not use this opportunity to teach them something about the real life of people that are in prison, that have been in prison, that, you know, you don't just lock them up and throw away the key. People do crimes for all sorts of reasons. I can guarantee There are people who have committed crimes, who have speeded, who have taken drugs, who've driven while having had too many drinks, and there, but for the grace of God, virtually everybody. So we can't just write off this huge swathe of our society because they've been to prison, innocent or not, guilty or not, convicted or not. So why don't we take this opportunity to show people who are willingly spending money to have an enjoyable experience, to come away with thoughts in their head about perhaps the next time they think of something, it applies to them for a job, who's got a criminal conviction, they meet somebody who's got a criminal conviction, or maybe a friend of a family is remanded for something serious. They'll have a different perspective. This is the opportunity, we take it. That's my view.
Lorna, you're absolutely right. And you should actually be running our tours, because that is almost taken from the words of how the tour guides will put things forward, in the sense of when they're opening gambits, is about how they're so much more than just turnkeys, and their job is so different from what people will see, because the reality of prisoners' lives is so different from what people see, and that process of where some prisoners shouldn't have TVs. It's one of the very common things we get when people come in. They shouldn't have access to gyms. By the time they finish a tour, the preconceptions they have when they come in have completely changed. You only need to look at our TripAdvisor reviews to see that, and you will see that people come away with a completely different opinion, with many, many debates of different areas and different sectors. And we talk about, how things have changed over time, from back in 1625, Gregorian times, Jacobean times, all the way through to Georgian times, Victorian times, and obviously where we are now, and also where we're going, and the scariness of where we're going. And none of my team, I don't think anybody in any of our prisons, certainly not our officers, in any support of the system the way it is. I think if anything, we're all against it. We think that the system is broken fundamentally and needs huge change for different reasons and different aspects. And the officers have lived it and breathed it. And they've seen the staff cuts and the staff shortages and the impacts. They've also seen the sanitation going into cells, the changes that have happened there. So they've seen lots of positives, lots of negatives. And that's what we do. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things when I looked at the delegate list here, I think it was Cara, for you guys, from the Children Heard and Seen, which I think is a great charity. And again, there's a huge talk about in terms of the unseen victims. You've got the offender, you've got the victim, and the unseen victims of the family, the people that are connected to both the prisoner and the victim in that sense. And what happens for them when people go inside? Because a prison sentence isn't just the prisoner, it's the families and everybody connected. So I think your charity is really strong in that. And I actually hadn't come across you until I saw this. But you absolutely can access things like our prisons, either of the prisons, and you can access that in whichever way you want to. You don't have to come on one of our tours. You can quite happily bring your own people and take them around yourself and showcase the prison in the way that you want to tell it. We're just providing the backdrop for it. So that's, and I think that brings me back to with the paranormal side of things. I'm not overly keen on the paranormal side of things in terms of some of the way that some things are done. There is absolutely a commercial aspect, and I kind of sit on the fence about the whole spirit and ghost things. And there's a huge amount of respect that needs to be paid to that. And I think some companies do it in a certain way, others do it in another way. And we do sit on the fence with that one, and we go, do you know what? That's not us running it. We're hiring out the building to be used. So I guess I absolutely could be accused of going, well, you're kind of. I agree with you. I'm saying that I've made a commercial decision there. And I'll happily hold my hands up to that. As I say, I run my business and my life as a complete open book.
So Joel, just picking on that point. Sorry, Faith. 2 points arising from that. Firstly, if this is an opportunity for educating people and sort of distilling compassion in people, so that when they leave, they feel differently about prison and the experience of prison life than they did when they came in. Is there a possibility to have is there an opportunity for people who want to find out more, for example, links on your website, if they're leaving their TripAdvisor review, perhaps their links to a website for further information where they can learn more about how they can support people, or how they can understand more sort of extensively about prison life? And secondly, do you have a charity that you support?
I think yes. I wouldn't say that we push people the compassion, what we do is we tell them the reality as our officers see it. And, you know, the other thing is that story as well, which is prisoners as well. I think there's a balance there still we haven't quite managed yet. So we let people then make their own decisions. We absolutely, we can certainly look at how we can put links to other places on our websites. They are very commercially built websites, I'm not going to lie about that. We're actually in the process of building our own charity at the moment, which is built more around a prison museum trust, which is more about the care collection of artifacts through prison history. We obviously have a huge amount of those already, and we'd like actually to create a much bigger collection, because I think those are really key pieces, and a lot of them are currently hidden away in different archives in different parts of the country. Because when the 7 prisons closed, everything just was sent to different archives. So we're actually looking at setting up our own charity, so there'll be much more, I think there'll be a much better connection there with other charities in terms of the prison side of things. But absolutely, I mean, any charity that fits with us, we're happy to support. I don't think it's or that we look at that's appropriate, we would support. We're not tied to any one particular charity in that sense.
Thank you. Faith.
Yeah, just picking up on like the education side of it. You do education packages for different age children, including at university level. Is the prison seen in the light of the prison estate as it is now? I mean, we don't have a fair and humane system. You know, suicides are high, families are separated, you know, there's this stigma around. You know, can you just briefly just explain what you want to achieve with the education packages?
So there's different types of education packages. So I'll break those down very quickly. We have what we would, I guess, call, it's maybe not the wording that my team would use, but we have kind of the mainstream education packages, which is very traditional schools, the academies, people that don't really experience prison, that potentially haven't had parents or family members that have gone to prison. So they don't really know about it other than what they see on social media and TV and such like that. So, and that's more based around I would suggest our kind of core guided tour, because they're starting from kind of scratch. Then we have people that will be connected to the prison system in one way or another. Maybe they've got parents that are incarcerated, parents that work there. They've, whatever the reason, they may have connected, and those will be done in a slightly different way, because there'll be more knowledge, more understanding of that already. And then we have what I would probably call our third tier, which is children who are already in trouble with the law, already going down a road of potential criminality for whatever reason they may be. And they're a very, very different, I wouldn't even call them a tour at all. I would call them a completely different education session, and it's delivered very, very differently. And we work very closely with the police in Somerset. We do a program with the police in Somerset where they will, because these children are already known to a lot of them, so they will bring them to us. And they'll bring them to us in a police van, so they get to see what the inside of a police van is like if they haven't seen one before. And they will come through prison, and we will take them through the process that a prisoner will have when they first come to prison. And we will take them around and answer their questions and take them through what a prison looks like. Again, we can't recreate it with all the prison stuff. We can only paint the picture, if you will, of what it would be like in the building it's currently in. So we do those, but the tours for the educational programs very much depend on what the school wants for the outcome. So in a very traditional sense, they're looking at crime and punishment. Again, is sort of a year 6, year 7 kind of year, so key stage 3, key stage 4s. When they get to university, they're normally doing things like sociology, psychology, sometimes law, sometimes architecture, sometimes geology. So those tours will always be tailored to fit with what the outcomes of the school want, because that's why they visit, ultimately.
Thank you.
Come in on that one. I'm interested in the education side of things, obviously, and earlier on you were talking about how you employ former prison officers. Have you considered employing former prisoners who I think bring a really interesting perspective to this?
Yeah, we do employ former prisoners. So we've got former prisoners, funny enough, that actually come and do what we would call acting with us. So they're playing effectively fictitious roles, if you will. And they're people that actually take part in the prison break event. So we've got former prisoners that come back and do that. We've got a former prisoner that's come back and talked about his escape, which everyone loves to hear about because it's this very Shawshank Redemption style escape. So it's that theatre piece. We've got prisoners that advise us quite regularly in terms of their perspective, their opinions. We don't have any prisoner tour guides at the moment. We used to have, and we did at Gloucester. And we've had different prisoners that have worked in our organisation at different points. I think at the moment we've only got a couple ex-offenders. But again, we're advertising for jobs at the moment, and I'd sent Phil a link to say, look, we're advertising for tour guides. Anybody's welcome to apply. Anybody with experience from either side of the bars, I'll be honest, is great for us because they actually have the experience already. They've lived it, breathed it, and done it. So they're brilliant for us because again, they can tell it from the reality. And Phil, I don't know if you took that any further forward or not. But yeah, we're very, very happy to employ anybody. We literally have no
9 hours a week,
like
and that opportunity was only 9 hours a week, and we place people in sustainable permanent employment, to help them resettle. So it didn't meet our criteria, but we appreciate it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jason.
Joel, just thanks, mate. Just going back to that, there's a couple of charities in London that do a similar thing. One's called Squash the Beef, which is about like taking kids who are vulnerable or who are in the early stages of their sort of criminal life to take them into the prison and give them that experience. Joel, does that how often does that happen? And two, is that a government funded thing that or is it something that you do freely, for society, or is it something that, and that's not meant as a criticism in any way because you're a business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Is that, how often does that happen, Joel? And how answer that first. That'd be interesting.
I'd have to double check on the exact number of how many times the program in Shepton in Somerset, I believe it happens once or twice a quarter. It's funded partially by the police force themselves through a pot of funding they have, and then we have then co-funded it, if you will. So we basically dropped, if you will, our kind of core pricing. I think it's been one of the things that we've been talking about a lot, and we recently undertook some of the funding actually that we had from the DCMS fund was taken around an audience development program, and the heritage specialists that came to work with us spent a lot of time with schools and a lot of time in the education sector to identify whether we were connecting with our audience close enough and well enough. And some of the work that came out of the back of that showed that actually we could be doing it a lot better and we could be doing it in a different way. And one of the discussions we had was about how we can support the accessibility, because there's a lot of people generally that really benefit from the programs that we do with children that are going almost down a life of crime. They're the ones that can't access it. And that's the problem. So we've started moving towards a model where we can basically completely fund that program, and we utilize some of the other more commercially viable models to help fund that. So things like Prison Break, which is a commercial section, the profits from that will help fund the education programs. And we're just now working on how we can subsidize the education sector or part subsidize the education sector so they can get into the building more often. And we look at the education section. So you've obviously highlighted one there, but Prison Mean No Way, which has been doing this for, I think, 28 years now. They've been going out and going obviously to schools in the van, kitted up like a cell, dressing children up as prisoners and doing that. We do a very similar thing. We just do it in the prison. We don't go to them, they come to us. So it's almost an extension of that.
I'm aware I don't want to dominate the group, so I'll just say one very quick thing. But that's interesting, Joel. But in order to like you were saying about the cell thing, you said there are a lot of people who wouldn't like to see a cell closed in respect to people who died or committed suicide in prison. But what you're really saying is that you are having to appease those people who go, well, they did the crime, now they've got to do the time. They shouldn't have TVs. Now, I get all that, and I know that is an opinion, but it's not an opinion we have, and I presume it's not an opinion you have, Joel. So when you say you have to do it well, then just do it well. Close that cell door or put the plaque up, but make sure that you're not trying to not upset those people. They are the people whose minds need to be changed. And part of your business is doing that successfully, but don't apologize for that part of your business, because that is what will stop all the bad press and will stop the people on this group from thinking you're just making money out of the dark past of a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think I think you're right, and I'll pick on that quickly. Firstly, I don't think it's it's so much about bad press. We're always going to get people that disagree with what we do. There's people that tell me regularly we should convert it into housing because it's just a better use. And when I live more in my private world, if you will, and Lorna will probably appreciate this again, I come from a middle class world. People tell me all the time, other business owners I speak to tell me I'm mad because I can make so much more money from developing it into a high-end hotel like the Malmaison, or I could do this, but it's just not my approach. I think in terms of, I probably didn't explain it well enough when we're talking about almost a cell of, I guess, commemorating. If we look at it like that, it's one thing to say do it well. It's another thing to do it well. And I won't do something or allow our team to do something that we can't do well. And at the moment, I don't actually think we've got the skill set, the knowledge, the experience, or actually the connection in-house inside our current working team to produce that. Because yes, we've got prison officers who have been, worked in the service for a long time, who have absolutely first-hand experienced suicide, self-harm, have had to go into cells, cut down prisoners, had to resus whilst they've still got ligatures around their neck and stuff like that. They've experienced that, but we haven't got the other side of it.
We've got.
I think that's what we do now, absolutely. Which is why I think this is why I engage with these things. And I say we should do these types of calls, and why I run it in the way I do and run the business in the way we do. Because what comes out the back of it, Jason, hopefully, is you and I connecting off this, and then you coming to look at the site, see what we've done, and see how we can do it and how we can do it well. Because we're good at what we do, but we're not perfect, and we're not going to get everything right. And if we're not going to get it right, I'd rather not get it wrong. And that's a different balance. With some of my other commercial organizations, I'm happy to get it wrong because of the type of business they are. But when we're dealing with the sensitive subjects like the prisons, and because it affects a lot of lives, I'm not happy to accept getting it wrong. And that's the difference, I think.
So sorry, are we not perhaps overcomplicating this a little bit? It's one cell on each wing that gets permanently locked with a little note on the door, maybe a nice plaque saying this cell is kept permanently closed in memory of people who took their own lives in this establishment in recent years. Please pause for reflection. That's it.
I think there needs to be more to it than that, Phil, because you speak from a position of understanding. But a lot of people that come in look at it and go, but I don't see why they should have TVs. They committed the crime. It's their own fault. We've got to get them from there to where they can read this and actually go, no, I'm going to take a moment to pause. Because if they read that plaque and they go, no, it's their own fault, then we've lost. We've done an injustice. So we've got to get them to that point first. And part of that is through the journey that they get to that position. So it's not a case of, right, the first cell you come to, let's do that, because we've got to take people on a journey. Education is about enlightenment. So it's about letting people we kind of paint the path for them. They have to take the journey down it. So it's not just a simple case of going, put a plaque on a cell. There's got to be more thought process to it, because people won't get it. I know they won't, because I see it every day.
Personally, I've read several hundred of the reviews that have gone online. Because of the position I was coming from, I decided to read the 1 and 2 stars and then the 4 and 5 stars. And it's clear there is a big split between the two groups of people. But what was common in the lower ratings is actually the tour guides did not act in the humane manner you're describing them. There's a number of tour guides that are reported on the reviews who were talking about, oh, you should have seen the bodily fluids being spilled everywhere in front of children. There's another tour guide who was spent the whole time apparently talking about sex offenders and how it was a sex offenders prison in front of 6-year-old children, and the parents didn't particularly like that. There was another one who felt that the tour wasn't suitable for children because it kept the children awake at night afterwards, and they wished it realised. So I think there is a lot more, whether they're prison officers or not, all prison officers, like people, are different and have different levels of empathy, compassion, support. Some are punitive, some are reformative and believe in rehabilitation. And I think we do need to perhaps provide a bit more direction and guidance as to that education process you're talking about. And I think we're kind of searching a little bit for excuses if we're not going to remember the people who died in less than 10 years ago in an establishment that we're hosting tours in. But I think I've said enough.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking slightly across purposes there, because you're picking up education along with a guided tour, and guided tours are educational, but they're not an educational program in the same way we deliver to schools. You're also not giving I don't think, a fair representation. Yes, absolutely, we get some bad reviews. that does happen. And yes, there have been tours in the past where we've had to speak to tour guides and go, oh God, what have you done? Like, you can't deliver it like that. And absolutely, there have been tours as well, and prisoners have done this as well, where they get caught down a rabbit hole and they start remembering a certain experience that they've had, and they start talking about that. We've also had tours, and one of those reviews, and you picked it up there, was by I think it was by a vicar, and he was adamant that the way that the prison system ran was completely wrong, and we agreed with that primarily, but he was adamant that it shouldn't be done that way, and that was our fault. And what you're also doing is you're picking up nearly 3,000 reviews, and terrible reviews, we've got 35, so that's 1%, and poor reviews, we've got 34, so that accumulates 2% of our total reviews in one platform is what you're picking up on there. And 2% is still a percentage, but when you connect that to our other platforms,
not judging the merits of
and all the
business.
people that don't come.
I'm not judging the merits of the business by looking at the reviews. I'm just pulling out some snippets of information that counteract perhaps the narrative.
And you've got to look at a whole picture. I mean, you're talking about, reviews wise, we're talking about in Shrewsbury, I think there's about 3,000 reviews when you accumulate them together for sort of the TripAdvisor platform that excludes Facebook and all the other places. And you're talking about 3,000 reviews against probably now getting towards 500,000 visitors.
Yeah.
There's a big number that don't review. And you're absolutely right, there are, and there have been instances, again, where we've looked at it and we've gone, do you know what, that's not the right thing we should be saying. And we've got to custom to audiences. And sometimes we'll get a public tour with 30 adults on, and it will get delivered slightly different to the next tour that might have groups of families on with young children, because you can change the language slightly in some of the descriptives based on the audiences in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fair point. Cara's got a question.
Cara, but I'm just conscious of the time, and I think the bottom line is that Joel's got a business model that's working for him, and he's going to keep doing it regardless of whether we think it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we're probably not going to agree on sort of where we think about it. But I just think in the time we've got left, that if given that Joel has given his time to come in and talk to us, that can we use this in some kind of useful way that that we can sort of think about, are the things that can be done in terms of, maybe increasing the sensitivity around the advertising, about, recognising that this is a difficult issue for families, for former prisoners, for lots of different people. And, are there ways that we can work together possibly to, maybe Ruth could have an input on the education side of things and make sure that, sort of it's dealt with in a way that reflects the reality of prisons then and now. Let's make this a useful sort of meeting, rather than just getting to 12:30 and going away and going, oh, well, that was, what did we achieve from that? What kind of things can we do? What can we do that's useful?
I agree, Cara. I was wanting to say that I'm really impressed with Joel's response, and the fact that he's taken the time to engage with, and talk to us about all of these topics, and recognise that you have a business to run, but actually, there are also really good models where, I know Timpson's is often cited, but where you can talk about the particular work that you're doing to engage with this community and to to promote that message. And I think that's what I would like to consider, really, is how can we support you to be delivering a message that we would be more comfortable with, really, because I think you have shown that you're really open to that, and I really appreciate your honesty here and your responses, and that the fact, like I say, that you've taken the time to talk to us, because I recognize you didn't have to do that. So.
I'm happy to. I quite happily spend my day doing things like this, and I would doing the other part of the job, because, to be honest, this is the bit that I enjoy, and I think it's how you grow and it's how you learn. And I learn a huge amount from this. And like I say, even when I took over the prison, my preconceptions of what we were going to do is so different to what we did, even in only a short few weeks, which was largely driven by the prison officers, and that grew and grew and grew with the more people we spoke to. I'm still fascinated by the people that come through the doors, and I think very quickly, Cara, absolutely, we're an open door, and we're never say that in prison, but we are an open door effectively, and we're happy to work with anybody and look at different things and look at different ways of doing things. I can't guarantee that we will change our marketing approach, because if I'm honest, we've spent a huge amount of time and understanding of how we do social media, and we do it very, very well. And And you know, that absolutely does bring people through the door. And obviously, like you say, we're running a business. No one's trying to hide that. But there is a balance between how we can make it, certainly how we can make it, I don't know what the right wording is, but how we can make sure that we don't offend people. We do our very best not to offend. And one of the ways we try to do that is by keeping ourselves quite open. So if that does happen, we're happy to discuss why and see if there is something we can do to change that. And I think one of the things that I was probably quite surprised at, and this is what I kept pushing back to Phil when through Twitter, was we get a huge amount of ex-offenders coming back. I mean, a really big amount of ex-offenders. Not so many at Shepton, but that's because of the style of prison it was in its later life. We get loads coming to Shrewsbury, most of which will come back with children, will come back with parents, will come back with partners, wives, husbands, so on and so forth. Because what they're doing, and you watch them, because most of them go on self-guided tours. Some will go on guided tours and they'll go, do you remember me, boss? And they'll have a conversation with the officers and they'll talk about different experiences and things. Most will self-guide and they're telling their family members, this is what it was like. And I've been there and I've watched parents turn around and go, this is where daddy spent his time. Do you remember when daddy drew you that picture and wrote you that letter? It was in this cell that I did that. And they'll talk to their wives and their partners and they'll say, this is how, you know, when I went through that time, when you were having trouble here financially, when this was going on, this is where I was. And I was in this room. And they'll take people in so they can see it. And I've watched parents go, oh my God, I never realized actually what it was like inside. I'd see it from the letters and the phone calls and I was worried, but now I can understand a little bit more about what you're actually going through. So we see a lot of that. And I've seen prisoners come back with children.
And is there an opportunity for families and children to talk about the impact of imprisonment on them and what a terrible time they had when they were in the community?
Absolutely. I mean, and this is things that happen as family groups. They come and do this themselves. It's not led by us. We're just, again, a facilitator with the building, if you will. And they'll take people around, and at the same time, they can learn more about the history of it. Because again, a lot of prisoners won't know what happened 200 years ago. They recognize what happened 10 years ago, for example. And I've seen parents go in and I've seen wives cry and husbands break down, traditionally that way, because it's a male prison, not a female prison. And I've seen, you know, a prisoner came in one of our first tours, a really, really big drug dealer, a huge drug dealer in the Midlands. And he came back and he brought his 10-year-old twins and he turned around to them and said, this is where I was, and I was in prison for this, and I changed my life because mum was pregnant with you guys. And I watched her break down at that time, just sort of going, you know, this was the time that he changed his life, and this is how it changed. And I spent time with Ricky Tomlinson going through his cell and talking about his experiences. So we have all of those brilliant, I guess, stories as well of changes. And I guess success maybe isn't the right word, but it is a lifestyle change, and it is a change that these people have, and an impact in a period of their lives that they can go back and reflect on. And we provide a platform to be able to do that. And yes, obviously, we do have a prison where, unfortunately, people committed suicide. And we do have a prison where, unfortunately, people were killed. And especially if you go back 200 years, that happened a lot more. And we've got a prison where people were executed. And those are things we try and take very, very carefully and considerately as best as we can. And I'm not saying we always get it right.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions or comments before I do a quick summary and make recommendations?
Just really quickly, Joel, just to say that I'd be really happy to come down and go do the tour, and then afterwards maybe talk with Philip's approval, obviously, and the rest of the group's approval, but maybe talk to you about how it might be possible to set up that kind of monument to prisoners who've come through the experience, because I think it's symbiotic, Rob. I think, by the way, Joel, I think if people realise that that's happened, it makes the whole experience much realer and, you know, more eerie, if you want, you know what I mean? More of it brings it home, you know, people know that people have taken their lives there, and it's done with respect, and it's done respectfully. Wow. And with the approval of the rest of this group, we could form some way of doing that.
Jason, that's an incredibly generous offer, and I think it would certainly be of huge benefit to Shrewsbury. I'm sure all of us here probably are aware of Jason's numerous film acting roles. And I'm sorry to bring that up, but that would, if you know, you generously offering to do that, to not launch, but to, you know, recognize the monument when it's first revealed, sure. You know, would be wonderful.
Yeah, well, let's do that. I'll speak to you. I'll find you, Joel, afterwards, and we'll talk about that. Obviously,
yeah, no, please do. Yeah, absolutely, and we'll be able to then put together a group internally as well in terms of to support that and work through how how that could come together. And we would want to do that obviously at both sites as well, because Shepton's got a very different history, and we haven't talked a lot about Shepton, but Shepton does. If you're able to visit the sites, I would recommend looking at both of them, because Shepton is very different. It tells a story. It takes a journey of lots of individual prisoners, and it talks more about individual prisoners over time, and certainly American military prisoners that have had time there when it's an American military prison. It talks more about the suffragette movement and has, you know, lots of interpretation spaces around those as well. So it's very different because it's a heritage site. It operates very differently from a heritage attraction.
Thank you. So shall I summarize? Is everyone happy then with that? Just before I do, I mean, Cara was blocked by the social media channel, and a few other people have been, and I think as a representative of Children Heard and Seen, it's important that her voice, you know, in terms of representing hundreds of families, especially children, it's important that that's listened to. So I think the social media strategy should be perhaps a little bit more tolerant. But in terms of summary, Lorna was absolutely spot on, you know, when she said trauma forms part of almost everyone's story in prison. And Faith was saying it's important not to other people, and that prisons and the people within them are part of our communities. And these are the kind of threads, this inclusion, that we need to run through when we're thinking about the language. So there's 5 short recommendations that we've kindly that we've agreed and which we'd like to put to you. The first one is you know, some rethinking around how the prison markets and presents some of its tours and events. You know, important to avoid dehumanizing language. You know, he was a sex offender. No, he was someone with a sexual conviction. No, and he was a person with a sexual conviction, and they're very different types of languages, and sometimes that can take a bit of an advice or guidance from someone in the industry, you know, because a murderer probably isn't a murderer. He's someone who committed murder once. He's not someone who goes and murders all the time. So there's you know, it's important to acknowledge that every person is a person, and we need to consider the impact of that language on the thousands of people affected by people in prison. So children, when they're on tours, they may go to school a week later and one of their friends' daddy's just gone to prison. And do we want that child ostracized in the playground with 28 other kids saying, your dad's in prison, your dad's in prison? Or do we actually want someone to walk up to that child and say, oh, I understand how terrible it is for you. I want you to know I'm always going to be your friend and I'll support you. And I'm sorry how hard it is that you're missing your daddy. That's what we want. That's the kind of education we want. So moving on to recommendation number 2 is, you know, we're claiming educational value. And I think if that's going to be our mantra, then it needs to be accurate. You know, we need to start not just talking about the prison in its historic 100 years old sense, but start saying just 10 years ago, this happened. It was the most overcrowded, the most brutal prison in the UK just 10 years ago.
It wasn't the most brutal, Phil. I'm going to pick you up on a couple of these points.
Fine,
you do have this tendency to go. You do have a tendency to go off on these.
Okay.
On these kind of.
You're right. You're right. That was a subjective opinion, and yeah. You're absolutely right.
The first point. We do that. Okay. That's what we do. We Lovely. May not always put that in the advertising, because in the advertising, we've got to get a very quick snapshot across a huge amount of noise in social media. So we have to catch something that catches, and that's social media, sticky collective content.
I agree with
you. So we have to do that. In terms of the education,
yes,
I agree with you, and that's exactly what we do. Is when people come to us, kids come away and go, "Wow, didn't realize that."
Yes.
I would almost certainly guarantee I would absolutely put my faith into it that children that before they come to us would be more likely to go, your dad's in prison. Whereas once they've done a tour with us, whether it's a tour, a public tour, whether it's an educational program, they're much more likely to come out the other side and go, actually, you know, and so we already do that.
Well, that's fantastic. I hope so. And I totally agree that it must be accurate. And if I've said anything that's wrong or inaccurate, then that's my opinion and I've got it wrong. So we need to make sure that the education experience is accurate. That extends to orange jumpsuits and various other things. And I just think that that's important to acknowledge, you know, the recent history as well as the past history. But our recommendation point 3 does revolve around the children and families. And what we'd like to suggest as a small committee here is that all visitors to the prison should receive information on Children Heard and Seen charity. It's the leading charity supporting families affected by imprisonment. So whether it's just flyers or gift aid forms or a small donation from every admission, which is great CSR for you, and will straight away hit home that there are real people and families affected by prison. It's not just a £10 tour here, 50p from every ticket sale goes to children heard and seen. And we've adopted this charity to meet our corporate social responsibility. We love what they're doing, and any families affected by imprisonment can call them, attend their support groups, and benefit from that never-ending support. An incredible charity. So we'd like to suggest that a bit of consultancy with Cara and Children Heard and Seen would be invaluable to the business, looking at it as you rightly do from a commercial perspective. Point 4 is the recommendation.
We can sorry, let me pick up. Cara, we can definitely do something. Absolutely. I don't know what that would look like. I think we can have a discussion about what's most appropriate. Handing flyers out in a COVID world, post-COVID world, is probably not going to work, and they end up in the bin a lot of time. But absolutely, we can do something definitely digital-wise. We can look at something, and I can see here on Twitter very quickly. I can see you've got a really good following on Twitter. We can expand that certainly to the the hundreds of schools we work with nationally, to the school partners we work with, to the other charities we work with the police forces. We already do those. So absolutely we can, and we'll probably find there's already a number of connections in that. So yeah, absolutely we can do something there without a doubt.
And that will be a wonderful outcome today. That cooperation, I think, would be invaluable, and it will help many families. So point 4 we have covered, which is the suggestion of installing key reflection points or a small monument, something tasteful, just to remember people who died in historic past and more recently, and also to remind visitors that this is a place where people sadly died. And point 5 is something you might want to consider, which is to establish, like a lot of successful businesses, an independent advisory board, a small advisory board with people who can be consulted before some new publicity materials are released, or before a press release goes out, on the impact of how will this affect people, the families, how will this affect people that have been to prison or currently going through that experience? Are we wording this, could we word this more tastefully? Could this better reflect a rehabilitative culture? Are we being a bit more too punitive in our wording? So I don't see any harm in considering having a small advisory board, and it might be that's the 5th recommendation that you might want to consider, independent of the prison itself.
We already have one. We do already have one.
Well, I think the reason for
it's exactly that. But right. Cara, maybe again, that's something that you would want to look at in the sense of, and potentially Jason as well yourself, because I think there's danger sometimes that those could be weighed too heavily on the other side of the bars. And I think that's something we can look at. And obviously there is a commercial element to that piece, but that's absolutely fine. That's not an issue either.
Well, we finished the recommendations. I'm a businessman myself, been an entrepreneur like yourself for 30 odd years. It's easy to hide behind commercial decisions and profit, but I'd like to just sort of close my words and finish up by saying, if Grenfell Tower came up for lease or sale as a dark tourism project, there would be hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, around the world who want to visit it. That does not make it an ethical business. So commercial.
There wouldn't be though, Phil. This is
ethical decisions.
Again, you've gone off on a really weird tangent. You go off on these, and I'm gonna leave you with this, Phil. I think you need to be really careful on Twitter about how you go off on these really weird tangents, because you stir up this drama with inaccurate facts. There wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of people who would want to go to Grenfell.
Well,
no, there wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of people who would want to go to Grenfell Tower. It's not like. No, I don't think anyone would want to. Okay. It's not, people go to the Twin Towers, they go to the 9/11 monument because of the sad loss of life, because of the atrocity, and because of the how it happened. Grenfell Tower, no one's going to do that. And they're actually talking about demolishing it at the moment. There's a big piece around it should be demolished.
Joel,
I would support
what I'm trying to say is, can I just say, saying something is commercial decisions and it has to be a business and things like that, that doesn't make it right. So just because people,
I totally agree,
that's all I want to say. I appreciate.
And I'm not going to hide behind it. I'm
okay. Look, I'm so grateful to everybody.
I'm not, Phil. Let me just. I'll let you finish. I will let you have the last word. It's fine. But as I think I've shown here today, and I do this regularly on social media, I'm not going to hide behind a commercial decision. I'm not going to go, well, I need to do that. That's my choice, and I could choose to do something completely different with the jail, but I choose to do it in the way that we do it. It may not be the way that you do it, and I think you pick up on things and connect them in ways that they're not comparable in the same sense. But you're absolutely right in the commercial sense. Just because something is commercial doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it should be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll let you finish.
I'm so grateful, and for you for attending this question and answer setting. I'm very grateful to everybody else who's attended today, and thank you all. And if anyone would like to say anything else in closing, please feel free to.
No, just thanks, Joel, for taking the time.
Anytime, I'm more than happy to.
And if anybody wants to, I think I'm connected with quite a lot of you on Twitter, but I'm at Prison Lawyer if you want to connect with me.
I'll be interested in actually visiting.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
However you want to connect with us, social media is a really easy way to connect with me directly. I think I use every single platform. So please do, and absolutely we'll organise you if you want to come and visit. We'll organise for a visit, and you can choose what you want to see and what you want to look at, and I can sort it out for you to go on different tours with different people, meet different. All of it's absolutely fine. It's all fairly straightforward for me to do. It's not a problem. And Phil, I hope you'll come and visit at some point, because obviously you talk a lot about what we do, and it'd be nice for you to come and see it firsthand.
I'll have a think about that. But thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I am grateful. Yeah.
No worries. You're just going to get 6 more sales. That wasn't the plan, was it, Faith?
Oh no, I'll get you in for free. It's fine. I'll make that work. That's
then I should come.
Oh, there you go. See, commercial world.
Yeah. Thank you again, everybody. I hope to speak to you all soon.
Bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.